Hello and welcome to this James the Bike Guy, where today we're getting a chance to take a look at the Downhillers XC bike, a bike from Santa Cruz that's designed to be able to get you to the top of the climb and have just enough travel that you can get rowdy on the way down. So that's right, in front of us here today is the Santa Cruz Tallboy V5, and this Tallboy is the CS level, which means this is one of their major sellers as far as part spec for the price. So we're going to go over the features and designs of this bike, figure out what it's all about, and then of course we'll find exactly what it weighs. Speaking Santa Cruz Tallboy C, this is the V5 version of the Santa Cruz Tallboy, which is their Downhillers XC bike as they call it, but in my opinion it's that one bike that kind of do it all with 120 millimeters of rear VPP suspension travel and 130 millimeters of travel up front. And that combo for a lot of people is going to match up with the trails that you ride typically, because that trail sort of numbers is going to allow you to have fun and enjoy the descents, but still be efficient enough and light enough to get back up to the top of the climb. Now, this being the V5 version offers a bunch of revisions for this year, including updated geometry for the frame, but also things like jumping into Santa Cruz's lineup of all their bikes are now slowly but surely getting the Santa Cruz glove box. So this glove box pops open. Inside of here are some tool wraps, so that way you can put whatever you want on the inside, your lunch, a tube, whatever it might be, and then that door just kind of pops right back on and locks just back into place. Now on top of that is where you would typically have your water bottle, so that's all integrated together. Of course, internal cable routing, I like to see that they have not yet gone the way of headset routing that you see on so many bikes. But the neat thing with Santa Cruz's carbon frames like the C model is that has tunnels all the way through, so that the cable routing, you don't have to worry about fishing or getting a specific cable because it's all tubed straight to the back. Now, other things to mention with this bike is up front, head tube is 1.5 to 1.1 inch. That's all pretty standard. Out back, you've got a 31.6 millimeter seat post diameter and of course a dropper mounted onto it. But the neat things for this bike, for this generation, is going to be in the revised VPP suspension. So essentially, with a VPP suspension, what that stands for is virtual pivot point. And out back, you'll see inside of the frame, it has almost a triangular shaped pivot. And so that pivot connects the lower link from the frame just above the bottom bracket to your rear chainstay, seat stay combination, which is all one piece. And then up top, you have another link here. And what those do is they counter rotate, which means that the pivot point of the suspension is effectively virtual and moving throughout the travel. What that allows them to do is have lots of control over the anti-squat, which is basically when you pedal hard, how much the suspension either compresses or drives down, and then control over anti-rise properties, which is kind of that braking performance, whether or not your suspension is still working while the brakes are on. And for the V5 version of the bike, they've done some adaptation to the VPP in the back, where they've adjusted it so that the leverage curve has you sit a little bit higher in the stroke, so that it's going to pedal a little more efficiently than the previous generation, but it also gets more sensitive the further through the stroke you go. What that's going to allow for is effectively the bike's going to take away some of that hard edge bump issue. You know, some of the bikes with too much anti-squat, too XC oriented, when you hit those square edges, like getting over a sharp rock or stair, whatever it might be, the wheel kind of drives the bike down and makes it harder to get over. So it's going to help smooth out some of that without taking away the absolute climbing capability of the bike. And that's really why you would be buying the Santa Cruz Tallboy, is you want a bike that's going to be efficient enough to get to the top of the climb, but also be rowdy going down. And for that rowdy geometry, the bike does come with a flip chip to be able to adjust high and low position for the geometry, which means in a size medium, this bike would come in with a 65.7 degree head tube angle in high or 65.5 in low, a seat angle of 76.7 high and 76.4 low. a reach of 455 in high, and then of course a chainstay length or a rear center length of 433 millimeters. Now the reach, which is effectively from the center of the crank going up to level out to the handlebar, that reach is going to grow, of course, with different frame sizes. And in that number, what we have here is a pretty modern geometry, a little bit longer front end, and that's commensurate with the 433 millimeter chainstays. Those are not the shortest, and they do actually get in different lengths based on the size of the bike to help balance out the rear end and the front end of the bike on how it feels. Last things to mention is, of course, going to be in the frame. So this being a Tallboy C, this is the lower level carbon frame. Now they share exactly the same geometry, same design philosophy, but there is a CC version which drops a few hundred grams in weight, helps reduce some of that weight, and is of course the nicer layup of this bike. But the Santa Cruz frames do come with a lifetime warranty as well as lifetime bearings. So while it doesn't cover labor, all the bearings that are inside of this VPP setup, which are sealed custom bearings for Santa Cruz, for the life of the bike and the life of the ownership, I should say, they'll provide you with replacement bearings at no cost. This bike being the S-level build is going to be their volume seller. They do have an R-level build, which is below this, which is the least expensive flavor. And as you go up, you're going to come to nicer level builds, and that's effectively just the part spec. So on this bike that is retailing for $5,899, you do have up front a Fox 34 Performance, which utilizes their fit grip damper. It's 130 millimeters of front suspension travel. Of course, boost 15 by 110 up front, and of course 12 by 148 out back. And that rear suspension is controlled via this Fox float shock. This is the Evolve version of the Fox float shock. It's a 3-position damper to be able to control. Of course, air adjustable with rebound adjust, just like the front end of the bike. And then the drivetrain out back is going to be SRAM's own Eagle GX drivetrain. So this rocks a single ring up front with a 32-tooth chainring going through a threaded bottom bracket, and it drives out back with this nice rubber dampener to keep the chain noise from causing you any distraction on the trail, to a SRAM GX lunar rear derailleur. This lunar rear derailleur is capable of 10 to 50 tooth of rear cassette size, but the bike is going to come stock with a 10 to 50 tooth rear end. That means 500% range, so quite a bit of climbing capability. And the bike itself is slowed down via some SRAM G2 brakes. Now these G2 brakes are coming with 6-bolt rotors and can run up to a max of 220 millimeter brake rotors in the rear. So that's downhill size, kind of tying into the rest of the downhill bits of this bike. Of course, shifted via a GX shifter here on the handlebar, but I especially love the BergTech alloy handlebar with this nice short and stubby stem. The BergTech cockpit looks so nice on the bike, and of course mounted up on the handlebar is the SDG Tellus dropper post. Always gotta love to see one of those. Even though they're pretty standard on trail bikes these days, I do love that you get that ability to raise and lower the seat post based on what you need to do. And the actual weight of the Santa Cruz Tallboy size large is gonna come in and weigh 30.56 pounds.